The trees were exploding, not at ground level, where a man might find cover behind a fallen log or a crater rim. They were exploding 60 feet in the air, where the German artillery had learned to set their fuses. The shells detonated against the thick canopy of the Hürtgen Forest, and the blast sent shrapnel screaming downward through the branches like iron rain. There was no foxhole deep enough. There was no cover strong enough. Men who had survived North Africa and Normandy were being killed by splinters of wood and steel, while lying face down in their own fighting positions. Welcome to the death factory. Private First Class Daniel Vance pressed himself against the frozen mud and listened to another round detonate somewhere above him. The fragments whistled past, thudding into tree trunks and soft earth, and occasionally soft flesh. Someone was screaming to his left. Someone else was praying to his right. The smell of pine sap mixed with blood and cordite in a perfume that would haunt every survivor for the rest of their lives. And lying across his back, crushing him into the mud with its 32 pounds of steel and wood, was the weapon that every man in the squad hated more than the Germans. The M1919A6. The infantry called it the Iron Pig. The armored crews called it a joke. The logistics officers called it a design failure. It was the answer to a question nobody had asked, a solution that created more problems than it solved. The army had taken the M1919A4, a perfectly good medium machine gun designed to be mounted on a tripod and served by a 3-man crew, and tried to make it portable for a single infantryman. They had failed spectacularly. They added a shoulder stock so one man could aim it. They added a bipod so it could be fired from the ground. They added a carrying handle so it could be moved quickly. But they kept the heavy barrel that was designed for sustained fire. They kept the thick receiver that could handle thousands of rounds without failure. They kept everything that made the gun effective, which also happened to be everything that made it weigh 32 pounds. The result was a weapon that was too heavy for an assault rifle, too light for proper suppressive fire, and too awkward for either role. A rifleman carried 9 pounds. A barman carried 20 pounds. Vance carried 32 pounds of iron and wood that made every step feel like walking through wet concrete. His squadmates mocked him constantly. They called him the pack mule. They asked if he was training for the Olympics. They suggested he tie a rope to the barrel and drag it behind him like a sled. When the sergeant asked for volunteers to carry the A6, nobody raised their hand except Vance. He didn't volunteer because he wanted the gun. He volunteered because nobody else would, and someone had to. Now, lying in the frozen mud of the Hürtgen Forest with artillery exploding overhead, Vance was questioning every decision that had led him to this moment. The tree bursts stopped as suddenly as they had started. In the ringing silence that followed, Vance heard something worse. The squeal of tank treads, the growl of a diesel engine, the distinctive mechanical clanking of German armor moving through the forest. Panzer. Someone shouted, Panzer coming through. But it wasn't a Panzer. It was something worse. The vehicle that emerged from the tree line was a Jagdpanzer IV, a tank destroyer. 25 tons of sloped armor with a 75 mm gun mounted in a fixed superstructure. It was designed to kill Sherman tanks at 1,000 yards. It could reduce an infantry position to scattered meat without slowing down. And it was rolling directly toward the crater where Vance's squad had taken shelter. The sergeant was screaming orders that nobody could follow. The riflemen were firing their M1s, watching their bullets spark harmlessly off the armored hide. Someone threw a grenade that bounced off the sloped glacis and exploded uselessly in the mud. The Jagdpanzer kept coming. Its gun was traversing toward the largest cluster of American soldiers. Vance looked at the Iron Pig lying beside him, a machine gun against a tank destroyer. It was absurd. The .30-06 rounds couldn't penetrate a quarter-inch of that armor. He might as well throw rocks at the thing. But as he watched the Jagdpanzer rotate its gun, he noticed something. The driver's vision port. A small rectangle of armored glass set into the front plate. The commander's periscope, barely visible above the superstructure. The gunner's sight. A tiny opening that allowed the crew inside to see their targets. The tank was blind without those openings. And those openings were not armored. Vance grabbed the A6 and pulled it into his shoulder. The weight that had been crushing him for months suddenly felt different. It felt solid. It felt stable. The 32 pounds that made his legs burn on every march were now pressing the weapon against his body with the immovability of a sandbag. He had fired the gun standing up before. It was almost impossible to control. The recoil would walk the barrel up and to the right after 3 or 4 rounds. But lying prone, with the bipod dug into the frozen earth and his body absorbing the weight, the gun became something else entirely. It became a surgical instrument. He lined up the front sight on the driver's vision port, a rectangle roughly 6 inches wide. At this range, maybe 40 yards, he could hit it. If the gun didn't jump, if he could keep the barrel steady through a sustained burst. The Jagdpanzer's main gun was almost aimed at the squad. 5 more seconds and a 75 mm shell would turn the crater into a grave. Vance squeezed the trigger. The A6 roared, not the thunderous boom of naval artillery or the rapid pop of the Bofors. This was a mechanical hammering, a rhythmic pounding that shook Vance's entire body. But the weight held him down. The mass of the weapon absorbed the recoil. The barrel stayed on target. 500 rounds per minute, 8 rounds per second. Vance held the trigger for 3 seconds. 24 bullets struck the front of the Jagdpanzer in a pattern that a marksman would have been proud of. 20 of them sparked off the armor and ricocheted into the forest. 4 of them hit the driver's vision port. Armored glass is designed to stop shrapnel. It is designed to protect against fragments and small arms fire at long range. It is not designed to absorb 4 direct hits from armor-piercing rounds at point-blank range fired with surgical precision. The vision port shattered. The driver, who had been leaning forward to see through the narrow slit, took fragments directly to his face. He screamed and jerked the controls involuntarily. The Jagdpanzer lurched to the left, its gun now pointing at empty forest. Vance shifted his aim. The commander's periscope. Another burst. 6 rounds. 3 hits. The periscope exploded in a shower of glass and metal. The commander, who had been scanning for targets, was suddenly operating blind. The Jagdpanzer stopped moving. Inside the steel box, the crew was in chaos. They couldn't see. They didn't know what was hitting them. They had expected infantry rifles, not a continuous hammer of precision fire that was systematically destroying their ability to fight. Vance shifted again. The gunner's sight. This was the hardest target, a tiny opening barely 3 inches wide. He had maybe 15 rounds left in the belt before he needed to reload. The Jagdpanzer crew would figure out what was happening any second. They would button up. They would call for support. They would do something. He steadied the barrel. He controlled his breathing. He felt the weight of the gun pressing him into the earth, anchoring him like a ship at dock. And he squeezed the trigger. The burst was perfect. 10 rounds in a pattern so tight that the gunner's sight didn't just crack. It disintegrated. The optical assembly was destroyed. The gunner, who had been trying to aim the 75 mm cannon, was hit by fragments that the sight was supposed to protect him from. The Jagdpanzer was blind. 25 tons of killing machine reduced to a steel coffin by a weapon that everyone called a design failure. The crew bailed out. 3 men scrambling from hatches, disoriented and injured. The sergeant and the rifleman cut them down before they reached cover. The battle was over. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The squad lay in their positions, staring at the immobilized tank destroyer, trying to understand what had just happened. A machine gun had stopped a tank, not by penetrating its armor, not by destroying its tracks, by blinding it, by taking away its eyes with surgical precision. Corporal Martinez crawled over to Vance's position. His face was covered in mud and blood from a splinter wound on his scalp. He looked at the smoking barrel of the A6, then at the disabled Jagdpanzer, then at Vance. "I thought that thing was useless," he said quietly. Vance didn't have the energy to respond. He just lay there, 32 pounds of iron and wood still pressed against his shoulder, his arms shaking from the sustained fire, his ears ringing from the noise. He had carried this weight for 3 months. He had cursed it every day. He had dreamed of throwing it into a river and walking away with nothing but a rifle like everyone else. And in the moment when it mattered most, that weight had saved his entire squad. The lesson spread through the company faster than any official training. The weight wasn't a flaw. It was a feature. The same mass that made the gun exhausting to carry made it devastatingly stable when firing. A lighter weapon would have jumped off target after the first few rounds. The A6 planted itself and stayed planted, allowing a skilled gunner to place rounds exactly where he wanted them. The soldiers stopped calling it the Iron Pig. They started calling it the Heavy Surgeon, because in the hands of someone who understood its strengths, it didn't just throw lead at the enemy. It performed surgery. Vance carried the Heavy Surgeon through the rest of the Hurtgen campaign. He carried it through the Battle of the Bulge. He carried it all the way into Germany in the spring of 1945. He never complained about the weight again. He understood now what the designers had understood when they built the thing. In combat, stability kills. The ability to put rounds exactly where you want them, round after round after round, is worth any amount of extra weight. The soldiers who carried light rifles could fire quickly. Vance could fire accurately. When a German machine gun position opened up, the rifle squad would dive for cover and spray ammunition in the general direction of the enemy. Vance would plant his bipod, settle his weight behind the receiver, and put rounds through the firing slit until the gun went silent. The M1919A6 was never officially vindicated by the Army brass. After the war, historians would call it a compromise weapon that satisfied no one. They would point to its awkward handling and excessive weight. They would recommend lighter designs that prioritized mobility over sustained fire. They missed the point entirely. War is not fought by committees. It is not fought by logistics officers or weapons designers or historians writing decades after the fact. War is fought by individual soldiers in moments of absolute crisis, when the only thing that matters is whether your weapon works, and whether you can hit what you're aiming at. In that frozen mud, with a tank destroyer bearing down on his squad, Vance didn't need a lighter rifle. He needed a weapon that would stay on target through a sustained burst. He needed mass. He needed stability. He needed 32 pounds of iron and wood pressing him into the earth while he performed surgery on a vehicle that should have been immune to machine gun fire. The Army eventually moved on to lighter designs. The M60, the M249. Each generation sacrificed some stability for greater portability. Each generation added compensators and buffers and electronic sights to achieve with technology what the A6 achieved with simple physics. But the soldiers who served in the Hürtgen Forest remembered. They remembered what it felt like to carry a burden that everyone mocked. They remembered the moment when that burden became a blessing. They remembered the Heavy Surgeon and the impossible shot that saved a squad. Vance finished the war and went home to a small town in Ohio. He never talked about the Jagdpanzer or the blinding shots, or the moment when 32 pounds of hated steel became the only thing between his friends and a 75 mm shell. When his grandchildren asked about his service, he would just shrug and change the subject. But he kept the carrying handle from his A6 on his workbench for the rest of his life. When people asked what it was, he would pick it up and feel the weight of it. And remember, "It's from a gun I used to carry," he would say. "Heaviest thing I ever loved." The paradox of the M1919A6 lives on in every weapons debate about weight versus capability. The armchair experts will always argue for lighter, faster, more mobile. The soldiers who have been in the mud will quietly remember that sometimes the heaviest burden is the one that keeps you alive. Sometimes the thing you hate carrying is the only thing that can save you. Sometimes the mockery of your squad mates means nothing compared to the moment when physics proves them wrong. Sometimes a clumsy pig transforms into a heavy surgeon, and the man who carried it through hell becomes the reason anyone walked out alive. If Vance's story of turning hatred into salvation hit you the way it hit me, smash that like button right now. Every like tells the algorithm that soldiers who carried impossible burdens deserve to be remembered. If you're not subscribed, now is the time, because next week we're uncovering another mocked weapon that proved the experts wrong. Drop a comment and answer honestly. If you had to choose between a 9-pound rifle and a 32-pound machine gun for combat in the forest, which would you carry? I want to know. I'll see you in the next one.